The hot coffee ran across the white table like blood on snow, soaking the navy blue blazer where the Medal of Honor shone solitary. Harry Thompson, 75 years old, a Vietnam veteran, remained motionless in his chair as the liquid burned through the fabric. His blue eyes, which had already witnessed the horrors of war, now stared at Sergeant Mike Peterson with a calm that only years could teach. The Sunshine Cafe, once filled with the joyful buzz of a Sunday morning, had plunged into a sepulchral silence. "Oops, that was an accident," Peterson sneered, his badge gleaming menacingly under the light streaming through the cafe's large windows. "Maybe that'll teach you to respond faster next time, old man." It was hard to believe that just an hour earlier, this morning had begun like so many others over the past 20 years. Harry had woken before sunrise, a habit he had kept since his army days. With precise and methodical movements, he had chosen his best blazer from the closet, the same one his late wife Margaret had given him on their last wedding anniversary. As he prepared, his mind wandered to memories of past Sundays, when Margaret was still alive and James was just a little boy. She had always insisted they dress well for Sunday breakfast, saying it was a way to show respect not only to each other but to themselves. Harry adjusted the metal on the lapel of the blazer, his fingers gently caressing the cold metal. He did not wear it out of vanity, but as a silent tribute to the comrades who had not returned home. The Sunshine Cafe was just 4 blocks from his house, a walk that Harry especially enjoyed on Sundays. The neighborhood still maintained that sense of community that had become increasingly rare in the big cities. The old houses with their well-tended gardens, the lush trees that shaded the sidewalks, everything there told a story of permanence and tradition. When he arrived at the cafe, as always at precisely 9 o'clock, he was greeted by the familiar aroma of freshly brewed coffee and warm bread. The establishment had maintained its welcoming atmosphere through the decades. The polished marble counter where the longtime customers gathered for their morning chats, the solid wood tables that held stories of countless family gatherings, and the large windows that bathed the space in natural light. Sarah, the gray-haired waitress with the gentle smile, already had Harry's usual table prepared. "Good morning, Mr. Thompson," she greeted him with the warm familiarity of 2 decades of shared Sundays. "The usual?" Harry nodded with a smile, settling into his spot by the window. Sarah was always struck by his posture, the perfectly straight back, the aligned shoulders, a dignity that neither the years nor adversity had been able to bend. She remembered when she first started working at the cafe, still young and inexperienced, and how Harry had always treated her with the same respect he showed everyone regardless of their position. The cafe was especially bustling that morning. A young family occupied the table next to Harry's, the parents trying to keep 2 small children entertained while they waited for their order. The older boy, around 5 years old, was swinging his legs impatiently, his new sneakers gleaming in the morning light. Harry watched as the boy, in a careless movement, knocked over his milk. "Oh, Tommy," the mother exclaimed, clearly exhausted. Before she could get up, Sarah was there with napkins and gentle words of comfort. Harry noticed how she skillfully turned the small accident into a lesson about mistakes and forgiveness, making the boy smile through his tears. These were the kinds of moments that Harry cherished most on his Sundays, the small demonstrations of human kindness, the smiles exchanged between strangers, the mutual respect that built and maintained a community. In his years of military service, he had seen the worst that humanity had to offer. Perhaps that's why he valued these moments of peace and civility so much. The cafe door chimed and Harry looked up hopefully, thinking it might be James. His son, now 45 years old, rarely ever missed their Sunday meetups. But the ones who entered were 2 figures that instantly changed the atmosphere of the cafe. Sergeant Mike Peterson and Officer Brian Roberts were well known in the neighborhood, but not for the right reasons. Peterson, a burly man in his 40s with early signs of baldness and a perpetual air of disdain, was infamous for his explosive temper and tendency to abuse his authority. Roberts, his younger partner, was like a shadow eager to prove his worth, always following the older man's example, even when that example led down the wrong path. The impact of their arrival was immediate and visible. Lively conversations dwindled to nervous whispers, parents instinctively pulled their children closer, and even little Tommy, still embarrassed by the spilled milk, fell silent. Sarah, who was serving a table near the door, visibly stiffened, her usual smile transforming into a tense line. Peterson strode up to the counter with heavy, deliberately noisy steps, his boots leaving marks on the freshly waxed floor. His eyes swept the room with an air of superiority until they landed on Harry. There was something about the veteran's silent dignity, the way he remained composed and serene, that seemed to awaken something dark in the officer. "Hey old-timer, what are you staring out the window at? Waiting for someone to die?" Peterson taunted, his voice loud enough to echo through the cafe. Roberts, standing a few steps behind, let out a forced laugh, like a hyena following the pack leader. Harry maintained his composure, choosing not to respond to the gratuitous provocation. In his years of service, he had learned that some battles are won with silence and dignity. He continued to hold his cup with the same tranquil firmness as before, although his eyes now reflected a deep sadness at the lack of respect he was witnessing. The lack of response seemed to further infuriate Peterson. He abandoned his spot at the counter and approached Harry's table, leaning in an intimidating manner over the veteran. The badge on his chest gleamed menacingly in the morning light, a perversion of the symbol of protection it was meant to represent. "When an officer asks a question, it's polite to answer, don't you think?" Peterson hissed, his stale coffee breath invading Harry's personal space. "Or is it that besides being old you're also deaf?" Harry finally raised his eyes to meet Peterson's gaze. In his look, there was no fear or anger, only a calm that came from decades of experience and wisdom. "Officer," he began, his voice firm and clear, "I'm simply waiting for my son for our Sunday breakfast, as I have done every week for over 20 years. It was then that Peterson, in a deliberate and cruel move, stretched out his arm and knocked the cup over the table. The hot coffee spread like a dark stain across the pristine white tablecloth, soaking Harry's blazer and running down to his pants. The metal on his lapel caught a ray of sun, shining like a silent symbol of resilience. Sarah started to move to help, but Peterson stopped her with a threatening look. "Stay where you are, sweetheart. The old man can clean himself up, can't he?" At that moment the cafe door opened once more. The chime of the bell had a different quality, almost like a harbinger. The figure that entered was not James, the son Harry had been waiting for. It was someone whose presence was about to completely change the course of that morning, someone who would make every person present at the Sunshine Cafe witness how justice can arrive in the most unexpected way. The sound of the bell still echoed in the air when Anthony Williams, a lieutenant from the Internal Affairs Division, crossed the threshold of the Sunshine Cafe. Tall and imposing in his well-tailored suit, he didn't need a uniform or badge to emanate authority. His dark, perceptive eyes immediately captured the scene before him. The spilled coffee, the elderly veteran maintaining his dignity despite the evident humiliation, and the two officers he had been investigating for months. In fact, Williams wasn't there by chance. For weeks, his division had been receiving reports about Peterson and Roberts, accounts of intimidation, abuse of power, and inappropriate conduct. However, as often happens in such cases, the victims were always hesitant to file formal complaints, fearing retaliation. The lieutenant had decided to do some discreet fieldwork, personally observing the behavior of the two officers. Peterson and Roberts hadn't immediately noticed the lieutenant's presence. The sergeant continued his display of petty power, now pushing some napkins in Harry's direction with a disdainful smirk. "Come on, old-timer, clean up the mess you made." "I believe the mess was caused by you, Sergeant Peterson." Lieutenant Williams' voice cut through the air like a razor. Peterson froze on the spot, his face losing a few shades of color as he recognized the voice. "And I must say, I'm particularly interested in finding out why two on-duty officers are harassing an elderly citizen in a public establishment." The silence that followed was deafening. Sarah, still behind the counter, let out an audible sigh of relief. The young mother at the nearby table hugged her children tighter, while other customers watched the scene with a mix of apprehension and hope. Little Tommy, who had spilled his milk just minutes earlier, now observed everything with wide eyes, instinctively understanding that he was witnessing something important. Peterson tried to regain his composure, forcing a professional smile that looked more like a grimace. "Lieutenant Williams, it's nothing like that. We were just checking out a suspicious situation." His words sounded hollow even to his own ears. Merely demonstrating a clear abuse of authority, Williams interrupted, his voice maintaining a calculated calm that made his words even more impactful. "Something that, I must mention, is no novelty for you two. In fact, I have here with me," he gave a tap to his leather briefcase, "several reports of similar incidents involving you over the past few months." Robert's face visibly paled. He was a young officer who had joined the police force with genuine ideals, but had allowed himself to be corrupted by Peterson's toxic influence. Now, confronted with the consequences of his choices, he seemed to be reliving every moment he had chosen the wrong path. Williams approached Harry's table, his presence creating a striking contrast to the intimidating posture Peterson had presented moments earlier. The lieutenant noticed the details that the others had ignored, the Medal of Honor carefully pinned to the lapel, the military bearing that years of civilian life had not erased, the silent dignity that radiated from the veteran. "Sir," he addressed Harry with genuine respect, "I am Lieutenant Anthony Williams from the Internal Affairs Division. Would you like to file a formal complaint against these officers?" Harry looked at the lieutenant with his perceptive blue eyes, silently assessing the situation. His blazer was still soaked with coffee, but his dignity remained intact. In his mind, flashbacks of his time in Vietnam mixed with the present moment, situations where the choice between vengeance and mercy could define a man's character. "I don't want to cause trouble for anyone, Lieutenant," he replied with a calm voice that carried decades of wisdom. "I just want to have my breakfast with my son in peace." "I understand your desire to avoid conflict, sir," Williams responded, maintaining a respectful tone. "But I must inform you that these officers have a history of similar behavior. Your complaint could help prevent other citizens from going through the same situation. People who may not have your strength of character to endure such treatment." As this conversation unfolded, Peterson began to show visible signs of nervousness. Sweat was trickling down his forehead, and his hands, once firm and intimidating Harry, were now trembling slightly. His previous arrogance had transformed into a palpable fear of the approaching consequences. Sarah seized the moment to approach with a clean towel and a fresh cup of coffee for Harry. Her movements were smooth and precise, years of experience allowing her to perform this small kindness without drawing unnecessary attention. "Here you are, Mr. Thompson," she said softly, starting to clean up the mess Peterson had caused. The fresh aroma of the freshly brewed coffee helped to dissipate some of the tension in the air. "Thompson?" Williams asked, a new note of interest in his voice. "Are you by any chance the Harry Thompson from the 25th Infantry Regiment?" Harry nodded slightly, surprised by the recognition. His eyes softened with distant memories. "Yes, I served in Vietnam with the 25th. Williams' face lit up with a new kind of respect, and his posture shifted subtly. "Sir, my father served with you. John Williams." He always spoke of Sergeant Thompson, who saved the entire unit during the '68 offensive. In fact, he kept a photo of you in his office. It was his way of remembering that even in the darkest moments, courage and integrity can prevail. The revelation had a visible impact on everyone present. Peterson, who moments earlier had treated Harry like an insignificant old man, now seemed to have swallowed something particularly bitter. His face alternated between shades of red and white as the reality of his actions began to weigh on his shoulders. The universe seemed to be conspiring to show him the magnitude of his mistake. "John was a good man," Harry replied with a gentle smile, the memory bringing a nostalgic glow to his eyes. "He saved as many lives as I did that day. I'll never forget how he carried 2 wounded comrades for nearly a mile under enemy fire." Williams turned to Peterson and Roberts, his expression hardening again. "Do you have any idea of what you've just done? Not only did you harass an elderly citizen, but you also disrespected a decorated war veteran. A man who risked his life to protect the values that you swore to defend when you put on that badge." The cafe door chimed again, and all heads turned to see who else would join this already tense scene. A tall, authoritative figure in a full police commander's uniform entered the cafe. James Thompson, Harry's son and the direct supervisor of Peterson and Roberts, paused at the entrance, his eyes quickly assessing the situation before him. Peterson's face lost the rest of its color when he recognized his superior. Roberts looked like he was about to faint, his wobbly legs barely keeping him upright. Commander Thompson walked slowly to his father's table, his measured steps echoing in the tense silence of the cafe. Each step seemed to carry the weight of the authority and justice that was about to be served. "Dad," he said softly, placing a hand on Harry's shoulder. "Are you all right?" Harry looked at his son with the same calm, dignified gaze he had maintained throughout the ordeal. "I'm fine, James. Just a small coffee accident." James observed the stained blazer of his father, the metal still gleaming on the lapel, and then turned to his subordinates. His expression was a mask of absolute control, but his eyes burned with a contained fury that made Peterson take an involuntary step back. The air in the cafe grew even thicker, charged with the promise that justice was about to be served in a way that no one there would soon forget. The cafe was about to witness how respect and dignity, when duly honored, can bring a form of justice that no display of brute force could ever achieve. The morning that had begun with an act of cruelty was about to transform into a lesson that would forever mark the lives of all present. Commander James Thompson remained silent for a few moments, his eyes studying every detail of the scene before him. 25 years of experience in the police force had taught him that sometimes silence could be more powerful than words. The Sunday breakfast with his father was a sacred tradition, a moment of connection that had become even more precious after his mother's passing. Seeing this moment profaned by the arrogance of his own subordinates made his blood boil. Sergeant Peterson, Officer Roberts, his voice when he finally spoke, was controlled but as sharp as ice. Report. The two officers automatically snapped to attention, years of training taking over their tense bodies. Peterson tried to maintain an appearance of professional composure, but the sweat trickling down his forehead betrayed him. Roberts seemed to be living his worst nightmare. Sir, Peterson began, his voice faltering slightly, I can explain. Silence, James cut him off, and the word fell like an axe on the tense air of the cafe. Lieutenant Williams, I presume you are here investigating the complaints about the inappropriate conduct of these officers? Yes, Commander, Williams replied, maintaining his professional tone. In fact, I have documented several incidents over the past few months. Intimidation, abuse of authority, harassment of citizens. What I witnessed today only confirms the pattern. Sarah, who was still close to Harry's table, gathered the courage to speak. Commander, if I may? She hesitated briefly as all eyes turned to her. Mr. Thompson is one of our most respected customers. What happened here today, it was not an isolated incident. These officers have been intimidating several people in the neighborhood. Little Tommy, the boy who had spilled his milk earlier, tugged on his mother's sleeve and whispered something in her ear. The woman, after a moment of hesitation, also spoke up. My son wants me to tell you about last week, when Sergeant Peterson scared him so much that he started to cry. All because his ball rolled near the patrol car. One by one, other voices began to rise in the cafe. It was as if the presence of Commander Thompson and Lieutenant Williams had broken a dam of fear and silence. An elderly gentleman recounted how he was humiliated for crossing the street too slowly. A young waitress reported inappropriate comments she had had to endure. Each story revealed a disturbing pattern of abuse of power and intimidation. Harry observed it all with a thoughtful expression. His years in Vietnam had taught him much about power and responsibility, about how some men can lose their way when they have authority over others. But he had also learned about redemption and the importance of doing the right thing. James, he called softly, and the son immediately turned to him. May I have a word in private? The commander nodded, helping his father to his feet. Harry's blazer was still damp with coffee, but he moved with the same dignity as always. The two stepped away, stopping near the window where the morning light created a dramatic contrast with their silhouettes. Son, Harry began, his voice low but firm, do you remember what I always told you when you were little and wanted to get revenge on a classmate who bullied you? James smiled slightly, remembering his father's lessons. That true strength is in how we choose to use our power, not in how much power we have. Exactly, Harry nodded. These men need to learn that lesson, but not through humiliation or vengeance. That would only perpetuate the cycle. James observed his father for a moment, admiring how even in this situation, Harry maintained his integrity and wisdom. The commander remembered all the Sunday mornings over the years, the deep conversations they had had in this very cafe, the life lessons his father had always shared with such kindness. What do you suggest, father? James asked, his voice softening as he addressed the man who had always been his greatest example. Harry adjusted the metal on his stained blazer, a gesture he always made when organizing his thoughts. These men need to understand the true meaning of serve and protect. Not through punishment alone, but through learning and growth. While father and son conversed, Lieutenant Williams took the opportunity to collect more testimonies from the cafe's customers. Each new story painted an even darker picture of Peterson and Robert's actions. The young waiter told about the tips he was forced to give the officers to avoid trouble. An elderly woman recounted how she had to change her morning walking route to avoid encountering them. Peterson and Roberts remained at attention, but their postures began to show the weight of their actions. Roberts, in particular, seemed to be having a painful epiphany about the path he had chosen to follow. James and Harry returned to the main table, where the commander resumed his official posture. Lieutenant Williams, I'd like to hear your recommendations in this case. Williams consulted his notes before responding. Based on the evidence collected and the testimonies we've just heard, we have grounds for immediate suspension, followed by a full investigation. The pattern of behavior suggests the need for severe disciplinary action. James nodded, then turned to his subordinates. Sergeant Peterson, Officer Roberts, hand over your badges and weapons. The entire cafe seemed to hold its breath. Peterson paled even further if that was possible. Commander, please, my family. Your family deserves a better example than you've been. James cut him off firmly. "Just as this community deserves better police officers than you've been." As the two officers removed their badges, James continued, "You are suspended pending investigation." "But," he glanced briefly at his father, "I'm going to offer an alternative to outright dismissal." All attention was focused on the commander as he explained, "Over the next 3 months, in addition to going through complete requalification, you will work at the Veterans Community Center. You will listen to their stories, learn about sacrifice, honor, and true service. And you will do volunteer work with the elderly in the community." Harry observed with silent approval. It was a punishment that offered a chance at redemption through learning and service, exactly the kind of lesson he had always tried to teach his son. "Additionally," James continued, "you will take an intensive course on civil rights and the appropriate use of authority. And each person in this cafe that you have harmed will receive a formal written apology from you." Sarah, who had approached again with fresh coffee for Harry, smiled discreetly. It was a form of justice that went beyond simple punishment. It was an opportunity for real transformation. "You have 24 hours to decide if you accept these conditions," James concluded. "Otherwise, we will proceed with the process of termination for cause." Roberts was the first to respond, his voice trembling slightly. "I accept, sir." "I'm sorry." He looked directly at Harry as he said the last part, unshed tears shining in his eyes. Peterson took longer to respond, his pride fighting against the reality of his situation. Finally, with defeated shoulders, he also accepted the conditions. Lieutenant Williams began to organize his documents, satisfied with the outcome. "I will need everyone who wants to give official testimonies to come to the police station this afternoon. Your statements will be important to ensure that real changes happen." Harry finally took a sip of his fresh coffee, savoring the familiar flavor. Little Tommy, who had observed everything with wide eyes, timidly approached his table. "Sir," he said with the innocence of a child, "are you a real hero?" Harry smiled gently at the boy. "No, son. Heroes are those who do the right thing even when it's hard. Like your mother, who had the courage to speak the truth today. Like Sarah, who cares for all of us with so much kindness. And like you, who faced the moment with courage even after spilling your milk." James observed the interaction with a proud smile. This was exactly how his father had always been, transforming moments of conflict into opportunities for learning and growth. The door chimes sounded again as Peterson and Roberts exited, escorted by Williams. The cafe began to return to its normal Sunday atmosphere, but something had changed. People were conversing with each other more openly, sharing their stories, building a stronger sense of community. Sarah brought a new blazer for Harry. She always kept a few extra clothes at the cafe for emergencies. "It belonged to my late husband," she explained. "He was also a veteran. I'm sure he would have wanted you to have it." While Harry changed into the new blazer in the cafe's bathroom, James handled the last administrative details with Williams. The commander knew that the next few weeks would be challenging, implementing the necessary changes in the department. But looking at his father, who was now returning with the new blazer and the same dignity as always, he knew he was on the right path. In the weeks that followed the incident at the Sunshine Cafe, a silent transformation began to take place in the community. The story of the veteran who faced police abuse with dignity, and the commander's son who chose justice over vengeance, spread quickly through the neighborhood, inspiring others to speak out against similar injustices. The Veterans Community Center, a modest red brick building at the heart of the neighborhood, became the main stage for this change. In their first week of mandatory service, Peterson and Roberts found themselves face to face with dozens of veterans, each with their own story of courage and sacrifice. Frank Martinez, an Iraq War veteran who coordinated the center, didn't make life easy for the two officers. "You'll start by cleaning the bathrooms," he announced on the first day, handing them buckets and scrub brushes. "And while you clean, I want you to think about something. Every veteran who uses these facilities risked their life for the rights you swore to protect." Peterson, who had always considered himself superior to others, found himself humbly scrubbing floors and walls. His hands, once used for intimidation, were now occupied with tasks he would have considered beneath himself. Roberts, in turn, seemed to accept the work with a kind of silent penance. During the group sessions, the veterans shared their stories. A 90-year-old man, a survivor of World War II, described the horror of the Normandy beaches. An Afghanistan veteran spoke about losing his leg to a landmine while trying to save a civilian. Each story was a testament to courage, sacrifice, and, above all, humanity. Harry began to attend the center regularly, not to oversee the punishment of the officers, but to share his own experience. He could see that his presence had a particular effect on Peterson and Roberts, a constant reminder of the consequences of their actions, but also an opportunity for redemption. On a particularly meaningful afternoon, Harry found Peterson alone in the common room, organizing old war photographs for the center's archive. The former sergeant seemed different. The arrogance had given way to something more reflective, more human. "You know," Harry began, approaching slowly, "when I came back from Vietnam, it took me a long time to understand that true strength has nothing to do with power over others." Peterson looked up from the photographs, surprised by Harry's initiative to speak with him. I don't know how you can even look at me after what I did," he responded, his voice laden with shame. "I'm not here to judge you," Harry replied, pulling a chair to sit down. "I'm here because I believe everyone deserves a chance to change." He picked up one of the photographs Peterson was organizing. It showed a group of young soldiers, weary smiles on mud-covered faces. "When this photo was taken," Harry continued, "we had just gone through one of the worst moments of the war. We lost 3 men that day. But do you know what struck me? How we came together afterward. How we cared for each other. The power of the uniform isn't in the authority it gives us, but in the responsibility that comes with it." Peterson was silent for a moment, absorbing the words. His hands trembled slightly as he held another photograph. "I never thought of it that way," he admitted finally. "The badge was always about power for me. About making people respect me." "And did they respect you?" Harry asked gently. The question hit Peterson like a punch to the stomach. "No," he responded after a long pause. "They feared me. And I confused that with respect for so long." In another part of the center, Roberts was having his own epiphany while helping a group of younger veterans with their physical therapy. Among them was Michael Chin, a former Marine who had lost the use of his legs in combat. "One more time," Chin encouraged as Roberts assisted him with his exercises. "When I lost my legs, I thought I had lost everything. But I discovered that strength isn't in what you can do to others, it's in what you can do for them." Roberts felt the weight of those words. Each day at the community center was deconstructing his old notions of strength and authority. The young officer who had once blindly followed Peterson's toxic example was now finding his own way. Sarah from the Sunshine Cafe began bringing coffee and cakes to the center every afternoon, turning the snack time into a moment of connection between the veterans and the 2 rehabilitating officers. It was during these informal moments that some of the deepest conversations took place. "My husband was a police officer," she shared one day, serving coffee to a group that included Peterson and Roberts. "He used to say that his most successful day was not when he arrested someone, but when he was able to prevent an arrest, when he could help someone make the right choice." Sarah's words echoed a lesson that both officers were slowly learning. Every story shared at the center, every moment of service, was gradually transforming their understanding of what it meant to wear a badge. Commander Thompson made regular visits to the center, not just to monitor the progress of his subordinates, but also to participate in the activities. He noticed the subtle changes, how Peterson no longer walked with the puffed-up shoulders of arrogance, how Roberts had developed a genuine kindness in his interactions. One afternoon, during a particularly emotional session, an elderly veteran was having difficulty telling his story. His hands were trembling so much that he could barely hold his water glass. To everyone's surprise, it was Peterson who first stood up to help him. "Let me, sir," he said softly, assisting the man with the glass. The simple gesture demonstrated a profound transformation in the once arrogant former sergeant. Frank Martinez observed it all with silent approval. "You know," he commented to Harry afterward, "when Commander Thompson suggested this punishment, I had my doubts. But now I see that he knew exactly what he was doing." Harry smiled, thinking of his son. James has always understood that some lessons can't be taught through punishment alone. Sometimes, people need to see a different example, need to understand the true meaning of service and sacrifice. The impact of the program extended beyond the walls of the center. The community began to notice subtle changes. Peterson and Roberts were seen helping the elderly cross the street, conversing respectfully with the homeless, voluntarily participating in community events even after their mandatory hours. Tommy, the little boy from the cafe, no longer ran scared when he saw police officers. In fact, he now waved enthusiastically at Roberts, who had become a regular visitor to the local playground, where he helped organize safe games for the children. One day, near the end of their community service, Peterson encountered Harry again at the Sunshine Cafe. It was the first time he had returned there since the incident. The former sergeant seemed nervous but determined. "Mr. Thompson," he began, his voice carrying a humility that had once seemed impossible, "I know an apology is not enough, but I want you to know that that day changed my life. You could have demanded my dismissal, could have publicly humiliated me, and it would have been justified. But instead, you and your son gave me a chance to learn and change." Harry observed the man before him, no longer the arrogant officer who had spilled coffee on his blazer, but someone who was genuinely trying to be a better person. "Sometimes," he responded, "the greatest victory is not to defeat an enemy, but to transform him into a friend." Sarah, watching the scene from her usual post behind the counter, smiled as she served 2 cups of fresh coffee. The Sunday morning that had begun with an act of cruelty months ago had transformed into an ongoing lesson about dignity, redemption, and the true nature of public service. The transformation of Peterson and Roberts had inspired broader changes in the police department. Commander James Thompson, seeing the success of the program at the Veterans Community Center, decided to implement new training policies for the entire police force. Not everyone, however, was satisfied with these changes. Captain Richard Blackwood, a veteran of the force with 25 years of service and known for his hardline methods, saw James' reforms as a sign of weakness. On a particularly tense morning, he burst into the commander's office without knocking. "Thompson," his voice thundered through the office, "you're destroying years of discipline and respect in this department. First this clown show with Peterson and Roberts, now you want all the officers to go through sensitivity training?" James looked up calmly from the documents he was reviewing. "Captain Blackwood, please have a seat. Let's discuss this civilly." "Civilly?" Blackwood practically spat the word. "Like your father was treated civilly in that cafe? You should have fired those 2 on the spot, make an example. Instead, you turned them into veteran babysitters." The commander rose slowly, his presence filling the room. "Captain, what happened to my father taught me a valuable lesson about leadership. Sometimes, the greatest strength is in how we choose to respond to injustice." "Nonsense." Blackwood slammed his fist on James' desk. "This city doesn't need sensitive cops, it needs order. You're putting all of us at risk with these progressive ideas." At that moment, Harry was arriving at the police station for his usual lunch with his son. As he passed through the reception area, he heard the heated discussion coming from the office. The younger officers watched nervously, while the veteran officers exchanged worried glances. "You know what your problem is, Thompson?" Blackwood's voice echoed down the hallway. "You inherited this job because of your last name, but you don't have the guts to do what needs to be done." Harry paused at the office door, observing the scene. James maintained his composure, but his eyes betrayed a contained fury. The commander had faced too much to get where he was, years of study, hard work, and dedication. The implication that his success was due solely to his family name was a low blow. "Captain," James responded with a studied calm, "my promotion was based on my record of service and the unanimous recommendations of the board." "And if you? Record?" Blackwood interrupted with a bitter laugh. "You weren't even here in the tough years. While I and other officers were fighting on the streets, you were busy getting your fancy degrees and polishing your office medals." It was then that Harry cleared his throat, announcing his presence. The sound made Blackwood spin on his heels, his face red with anger paling slightly as he recognized the veteran. "Captain Blackwood," Harry spoke with that same calm voice he had used to confront Peterson at the cafe, "you mentioned the tough years?" Without waiting for a response, Harry entered the room and closed the door behind him. "Let me tell you about the tough years. In 1968, I was in a trench in Vietnam with 18 men under my command. Most of them were barely old enough to shave, but they all had to make life-and-death decisions." Harry approached the desk, his eyes fixed on Blackwood. "You know what I learned there? That yelling louder doesn't make you a better leader. That true strength isn't in how much fear you can instill, but in how much respect you can earn." "That was war," Blackwood tried to argue, but his voice had lost some of its previous conviction. "It's different, is it?" Harry asked softly. "Because from what I see, the mission is the same, protect and serve. The question is, protect and serve how? Through fear or through respect?" James watched the interaction with a mix of pride and admiration. His father, even without a uniform or a badge, emanated more natural authority than Blackwood could ever hope to achieve with all his yelling and threats. "When I came back from the war," Harry continued, "I saw many good men lose their way because they couldn't leave the combat mentality behind. They kept seeing enemies everywhere, even at home. Is that what you want for this police force, Captain? Officers who treat their own community as a war zone?" The silence that followed was deafening. Blackwood seemed to be struggling internally, decades of conditioning confronting an uncomfortable truth. "The changes my son is implementing are not about weakness," Harry concluded. "They're about evolution. About recognizing that the world has changed and our tactics need to change with it. At that moment, a commotion outside the office drew everyone's attention. Peterson and Roberts had arrived for a review meeting, bringing with them Frank Martinez from the Veterans Center. Seeing Blackwood, Peterson tensed up. The captain had been his mentor in the early years of his service. "Sergeant Peterson," Blackwood called, his voice now carrying a different note. "How is your special training going?" Peterson straightened his shoulders before responding, but not with the former arrogance. There was dignity in his posture now. "It's been transformative, sir. I've learned more about true leadership in the past few weeks than in all my years of service." The response seemed to strike Blackwood like a physical blow. He looked around the room at the faces staring back at him, the commander with his resolute calm, Harry with his unwavering dignity, Peterson with his newly earned humility. "Perhaps," Blackwood began, then stopped, starting again with less certainty in his voice, "perhaps I need to reevaluate some things." "There is always room for growth," James offered, extending a folder across his desk. "This is the complete proposal for the new training guidelines. I'd appreciate your professional opinion on them, after you've had a chance to study them properly." The gesture of inclusion did not go unnoticed. Blackwood took the folder with slightly trembling hands, years of certainties beginning to unravel before his eyes. "And Captain," Harry added gently, "the Veterans Center always has room for one more volunteer. Sometimes, the best lessons come from unexpected places." As Blackwood left the office, visibly shaken, James turned to his father with a grateful smile. "You always know just what to say, don't you?" "Not exactly," Harry replied with a twinkle in his eye. "But I've learned that when you speak from the heart, the right words tend to find their way." Peterson, still standing at the door with Roberts and Martinez, observed the scene with a new understanding. The transformation he and his partner had experienced was only just beginning to spread, like ripples on a lake after the impact of a stone. 6 months after the incident at the Sunshine Cafe, the city was preparing for a special ceremony at the Veterans Community Center. What had started as a punishment for 2 police officers had transformed into a model police reform program, attracting attention from departments in other cities. The main hall of the center was decorated with simplicity and dignity. American flags adorned the walls, and rows of chairs had been arranged to accommodate the community. In the front row, Harry Thompson sat beside Sarah from the Sunshine Cafe, both observing the final preparations. "I never imagined that terrible morning would result in something like this," Sarah commented, adjusting the flower arrangement on one of the tables. "It's almost hard to believe those are the same men." Harry followed her gaze to where Peterson and Roberts were helping some elderly veterans settle into their seats. The contrast with their former personalities could not have been greater. The once arrogant former sergeant now moved with a surprising gentleness, ensuring each veteran was comfortable. "Sometimes," Harry replied with a soft smile, "people just need an opportunity to show the best of themselves." Commander James Thompson took the stage, adjusting the microphone. The room was packed. Police officers, veterans, community members, and even local reporters were crammed into the space. Beside him, Frank Martinez held a polished wooden box with a solemn air. "6 months ago," James began, his voice echoing through the silent hall, "an incident at a local cafe forced us to confront an uncomfortable truth about our police force. Today we are here not only to recognize individual changes, but to inaugurate a new chapter in our department." In the audience, Captain Blackwood shifted uncomfortably in his chair. In the past few weeks, after his own experience at the center, he had become one of the most vocal advocates for the new program. "The Community Integration and Dignity in Service program," James continued, "was born out of a conflict situation, but has transformed into something much greater. Today we are not only graduating our first class, we are redefining what it means to serve and protect." Peterson and Roberts, now in immaculate uniforms, stood at attention beside the stage. Their faces reflected a mix of pride and humility that would have been impossible to imagine months earlier. "Before we proceed with the ceremony," James paused significantly, "I'd like to invite my father, Harry Thompson, to say a few words." A murmur of approval rippled through the audience as Harry slowly rose to his feet. The blazer Sarah had given him months ago had been carefully cleaned for the occasion, his Medal of Honor gleaming under the hall's lights. "I'm not much of a speechmaker," Harry began with his characteristic modesty, "but today I need to share something important. When that cup of coffee was spilled on me, I could have chosen the path of anger or vengeance. It would have been understandable, perhaps even justified." He paused, his eyes finding those of Peterson and Roberts. "But I learned long ago that true strength isn't in how much we can hurt others, but in how much we can help them grow. What these men have achieved in the past months is proof of that. The silence in the hall was absolute. Some people discreetly wiped away tears. This program, Harry continued, is not about punishment or humiliation. It's about human connection. It's about remembering that behind every uniform, every medal, every badge, there is a person capable of both error and redemption. At that moment, something unexpected happened. An elderly man in the third row struggled to his feet. It was Joseph Miller, a Vietnam veteran who had initially refused to participate in the program, arguing that police officers could not change. "Mr. Thompson," his voice trembling with emotion, "I need to confess something. When you came to me 3 months ago, asking me to give these officers a chance, I thought you were wasting your time. I was wrong." Miller walked slowly to the stage, leaning on his cane. "These men not only learned, they taught us as well. They taught us that it's never too late to change, that prejudices can be overcome, that bridges can be built even over the deepest of chasms." Miller's spontaneous declaration caused an uproar in the hall. Other veterans began to stand up, each sharing a story of how the program had impacted their lives. An elderly woman told how Peterson now helped her with her weekly grocery shopping. A young veteran described how Roberts had organized a support group for former combat troops with PTSD. Frank Martinez opened the wooden box he was holding, revealing 2 new badges. "These badges," he announced, "are different from the ones you used to wear. They were forged from the metal of metals donated by veterans, men and women who believe you have truly understood the meaning of service." Peterson was the first to receive his new badge. His hands trembled visibly as he took it. "This badge," he said, his voice choked with emotion, "represents not just authority. It represents responsibility, humility, and above all, the trust this community has placed in us." Roberts followed, accepting his badge with tears in his eyes. "I promise to honor this second chance every day of my life," he declared simply. The most surprising moment, however, was yet to come. Captain Blackwood rose and walked up to the stage. "Commander Thompson," he spoke into the microphone, "I would like to volunteer to be the next instructor for the program. My years of experience can serve a better purpose than maintaining old paradigms." Blackwood's offer represented more than a simple administrative change. It was a symbol of how transformation could reach even the most resistant. James nodded in approval while Harry smiled, knowing that the legacy of that morning at the cafe would continue to expand. Sarah, still in her place in the front row, firmly held an envelope in her hands. Inside was the deed to the Sunshine Cafe. She had decided to officially transform it into a regular meeting point for police officers and veterans, a place where coffee and understanding would always be served in equal measure. When the official ceremony ended, the community didn't immediately disperse. People stayed, talking, sharing stories, building connections. Peterson and Roberts, now officially reinstated to the police force, were surrounded by veterans and citizens who once feared them but now saw them as examples of real change. Harry observed everything with quiet satisfaction. The morning that began with a spilled cup of coffee had transformed into a movement of change that would continue far beyond that day. His dignity in the face of cruelty had inspired not only individual transformation but a revolution of compassion and understanding that was just beginning. 1 year after the ceremony at the Veterans Community Center, the Sunshine Cafe maintained its Sunday routine. Harry Thompson occupied his usual spot by the window, but now he was rarely alone. His table had become an informal meeting point for veterans, police officers, and community members. On this particular morning, the aroma of freshly brewed coffee mingled with the smell of toast and warm laughter. Peterson and Roberts, now regular instructors in the integration program, shared stories with a group of new recruits. Captain Blackwood, unrecognizable in his gentler new persona, discussed community policing strategies with Frank Martinez. Sarah, still agile despite the additional years, navigated between tables with the same grace as always. The cafe had transformed into something greater than just an establishment. It was a living symbol of how a community could heal and grow together. "More coffee, Mr. Thompson?" Sarah asked with her familiar smile, the thermal carafe already tilted over Harry's cup. "Please, Sarah," he replied, watching how the dark coffee formed small swirls in the cup. It was the same brand he had been drinking for decades, but somehow it tasted different now, sweeter perhaps, or simply enriched by the new memories the place carried. At the next table, Peterson was explaining to a group of young officers about the importance of empathy in police work. "See that gentleman over there?" He pointed discreetly to a lone veteran who had just entered the cafe. "Before, I would have ignored him or worse, seen him as a potential problem. Now I know that every person has a story that deserves to be heard. The veteran in question was Robert Jenkins, new to town. His hands trembled slightly while holding the menu, a clear sign of PTSD that Peterson had learned to recognize during his time at the community center. Without hesitation, Robert stood up and approached him. "Welcome to Sunshine Cafe, sir," Roberts greeted him gently. "May I join you? We have a group of veterans that meets here regularly, and we'd love to have your company." The program started on that fateful day had expanded far beyond initial expectations. The model developed by James Thompson was being adopted by police departments across the country. Delegations from other cities regularly came to observe how a simple spilled cup of coffee had catalyzed a quiet revolution in community policing. Captain Blackwood, who now coordinated the training program alongside Frank Martinez, had become one of the most eloquent advocates for the new approach. "It's not just about changing procedures," he would often say in his lectures. "It's about changing hearts and minds, starting with our own." Tommy, the boy who years ago had spilled his milk on that fateful morning, was now a teenager who dreamed of becoming a police officer. He often spent his afternoons at the community center, listening to veteran stories and learning lessons about courage, dignity, and service that no manual could teach. Sarah had transformed the cafe into more than a meeting point, it was a sanctuary of human connection. The walls, once decorated only with old town photos, now displayed a gallery of portraits. Veterans, police officers, and ordinary citizens, all united by the same community. Under each photo, a small plaque told a story of transformation. "You know, Dad," James commented during one of their Sunday coffees, "sometimes I wonder what would have happened if you had reacted differently that day. If you had responded to violence with violence?" Harry paused, considering the question while watching the activity in the cafe. Peterson was now sitting with Jenkins, listening attentively as the veteran shared his story. Roberts was organizing a study group with young officers, teaching them about the importance of respect and dignity in police work. "Violence," Harry finally replied, "only breeds more violence. But dignity has the power to transform lives." He smiled, adjusting the medal on his blazer, the same one Sarah had given him that morning. "Look around you, son. See how a simple choice can create waves of change?" The doorbell chimed, and more people entered, a mix of blue uniforms and military jackets, of young and wrinkled faces, all united by a sense of belonging that transcended their differences. The Sunshine Cafe had become a living testimony to how dignity could heal old wounds and build bridges across seemingly insurmountable chasms. "True power," Harry continued, "isn't in making others bend to our will, but in standing tall even when they try to knock us down. It's about choosing to be an example, even when it would be easier to be revenge." Sarah approached again, this time bringing a slice of her special apple pie that she always reserved for Harry. "You know what's funny?" she remarked, placing the plate on the table. "That morning could have ruined this place forever. Instead, it transformed it into something even more special." The cafe maintained its steady rhythm, a symphony of conversations, laughter, and clinking cups. Each Sunday brought new stories, new connections, new opportunities for learning and growth. The incident that could have divided the community had, instead, become the catalyst for a deeper union. Harry watched as Blackwood stood up to welcome a new group of recruits entering the cafe. The former hardliner now spoke with a gentleness that seemed natural, as if it had always been his true nature, just waiting for the opportunity to emerge. "The true measure of a person," Harry shared with his son, "isn't in never falling but in how they choose to rise." Peterson and Roberts fell, yes, but look how they rose. Blackwood too. All of us in some way were transformed by that morning. The morning sun streamed through the cafe's large windows, creating golden patterns on the wooden floor. It was the same sun that had witnessed so many moments in this place, some of pain, others of joy, but all part of a greater story of redemption and renewal. And so, the Sunshine Cafe continued its silent mission, serving not just coffee and cakes, but also hope and transformation. It was a daily reminder that dignity, when maintained even in the most adverse circumstances, had the power to change not just moments but entire lives. And there, at his table by the window, Harry Thompson remained a beacon of wisdom and dignity, his example inspiring each new generation to choose the path of respect and understanding, one cup of coffee at a time. Friends, what did you think of this moving story? If you were touched by this narrative of transformation and redemption, don't forget to leave your like and subscribe to Life Stories channel. Your comments are very important to us. Tell us what you thought of this story of dignity and change. Share it also with those who need to hear that there's always hope for transformation. Until the next story.